We have minutes to approve? No, not actually. We can cross that off. All right, guys, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Hi, Margie. We are not gonna do the approval of minutes. Do we have even a quorum with our two missing people? Do we need to take any votes or revisit? Cause I wasn't here last week. Do we have material that we need to revisit or vote on? Agenda number 3.
I don't think there's anything to vote on tonight.
Great. So that's number 3 out of the way. So then we can get right into what we are here for tonight, which is to discuss our potential recommendation around the expansion of high quality early learning. And I thought that the best thing for us to do before we actually start to dig into some of the details of what is essentially kind of a proposed, assumed, possible arrangement for our cost modeling, that we would have the expert we all know and trust kind of walk us through some slides to set the stage, make sure we're all kind of mentally on the same page about just the current lay of the land. So Madeline Byard, welcome.
I think I know everybody.
And
I mean, really just a few things to consider, update on where we are with state-funded pre-K and purchase of care and kind of what we're seeing around the country from other states, just to kind of ground the conversation. So jump in if you have questions. I think the biggest headline is thank you for investing. What you're investing in is working. We hear that from the field. Investing in quality at the cost of care gives stability to families, it gives stability to providers, it provides access to quality, provides access to compensation. And so, I mean, my feeling is what you all invested in as Reading in pre-K is a success to scale. And you influenced how the state has thought about pre-K. So, I mean, I think that's one of the goals of, I know that's one of your goals overall, is kind of influence the bigger policy picture.
how do we build on that?
Absolutely. I think that's kind of my first headline. If you want to go to the next slide, thanks. You know, the other headline is there are lots of lessons from other states. One of the benefits of being in the bottom 10 or 15 is that we can learn from what they've done. And mostly now states are expanding access by increasing income eligibility, dedicating revenue streams. Some of them are creating funds. We can talk about those different approaches, but maybe whereas 10 years ago, you saw them doing 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds, that approach really we've learned from that about how that destabilized the field. And so most of the states that did that said, don't do that. Look at birth to 5. And so one of the big lessons has been that the pilot we've done in the last few years around ECAP being birth to 5, just being much more stable for childcare providers who tend to make up some of the money they lose on infants with 3- and 4-year-olds, and kind of continuing that mixed delivery system. So lots to learn from other states. And I think the other one is just thinking about the capacity. So, you know, there's no overnight put a bunch of money in the system and all of a sudden we have lots of teachers or we have lots of buildings that are, you know, up to code. So there needs to be these upfront investments too. We were able to partner with a lot of centers who have high quality to deliver the Reading pre-K. But to get to that next tier, you're going to have to build capacity of others to be able to do that. So those are some of my high level headlines, and I'll keep going unless people have questions. So
Yeah,
jump in anytime.
pipe up if you have any questions. I can't see you anyway. I don't know if you can, Elena, see hands or chat, but yeah, so just feel free to shout out.
Yeah. So the current state of ECAP, the Early Childhood Assistance Program, which is run out of DOE, which is our state-funded pre-K program. It is mixed delivery. It's about 1/3 in school districts and the other 2/3 in community-based organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, family childcare. It is serving ages birth to 5 right now, and it goes up to 200% of the federal poverty limit. We have contracts, which is the stabilizing part, because providers know they're going to have that contract, kind of like a school year. When you know your child's coming in 3rd grade, you're going to be paid for them for the year. And then purchase of care serves for the summer months. The rate is based on the cost of care. So the state did a cost study in 2024, and that includes the compensation that I know you all have prioritized and quality that you all have prioritized, which is very positive. There's no family co-payment. And all that's great. And the challenging thing is there's only enough funding right now for 1,803 kids statewide. And so across all the federally funded program, all the publicly funded programs, federal and state, we're serving about 1 in 5 kids. So it's not a lot. That's our big opportunity. And a little bit on the national landscape and then get into the details or do whatever you guys want, but we have these 2 programs, ECAP, which is run on the Department of Education, and Purchase Care, which is run on DHSS. They both, they've aligned around this 200% of the federal poverty limit, which, just to put in context, is 2 adults making minimum wage. If you make more than that, you do not qualify, which puts us at about 54% of state median income. And when you look at kind of where we rank, when you use these access and qualifying numbers, we are 43rd out of the 46 states that offer pre-K. So some states don't offer it at all, but we're only serving 8% in ECAP. And then in terms of the childcare subsidy, if you look at the state median income, we're 44th in terms of where we rank according to our state median income and how many families have access. So we're pretty far behind on who we're serving and we have a lot of room to go. The good news is there's states to learn from and are making big investments even, in the challenging times we're in. So you've probably read that New Mexico has universal childcare with no family copayment, birth to 5 starting in November. They had a couple of financing mechanisms, committed things in the Constitution, put things in a fund. They've had a huge commitment from their governor and lieutenant governor, and that's been exciting to see. DC is probably the cautionary tale of they did 3 and 4-year-olds and then had to figure out how to stabilize birth to 3. So they're kind of moving up that income limit. As you can see, they did some of these investments by increasing taxes for those making more. Vermont did a payroll tax similar to what we did for paid family medical leave. And the advocate that I've talked to there says, yeah, we've solved about half our problem by getting to 575 and making the investments they've made. Maine has gotten up to 500% of federal poverty level. New York made general fund investments. Connecticut created an endowment fund with some reserves. And they've committed to people making $100,000 paying or less, paying nothing, and no one paying more than 7%. So that's really just kind of the, like, it's possible, what are the other states doing, ideas. And I think you all know that, there are lots of investments and there are lots of case to be made for these kinds of investments, but
Yeah,
just trying to give you a sense of landscape.
no, that's awesome. Thank you, for just getting our heads in the right space.
Happy to.
So our, conversation is really about how can we take a step forward, in terms of a proposal that we attach to our redistricting plan. I don't think there's disagreement around the idea that like universal birth to, the New Mexico, I guess, gold standard is like a great, end goal as a state, but I think we're trying to figure out what can we do, and recommend as the Reading Consortium, looking at specifically, the students that we're most concerned with, obviously those that have been long underserved in the city of Wilmington, but now that we're talking about some broader in scope redistricting proposals, every family, I think would also fall into that sort of impacted zone. So sort of looking at northern Newcastle County, looking at what we've all been dreaming about and talking about for many, many years, how can we make a realistic set of recommendations, to move us towards universal as a state. I don't know whether that means like we're piloting something that allows us some demonstration and some course correction that then lays a landscape for doing it at scale. And so we're here today to figure out what we're going to ask to have costed out and what some, what do we think would be prudent, or how many options do we need to be considering when it comes to those costs? So the way I approached this in terms of our list of cost considerations kind of went with like an assumption of what we think we want to get costed out. So that's sort of the ideal scenario. And then just listed some alternatives for us to consider whether or not we want to factor them into an alternative cost out or that kind of thing. So a little bit just trying to see if we can affirm our assumption for cost modeling in each case, and whether or not that covers everything that we want to have estimated, or if we want to have some, you know, like an option A and option B kind of a thing. So the first one would be the scope of services. I think, you know, taking into account what Madeline just presented and the cautionary tale around pre-K 3 and pre-K 4, that was kind of the question. Do we get a cost for pre-K 3 and keep it pre-K 4 and a cost out for birth through pre-K 4? And you know, based on that, it seems like it might not necessarily be a good idea for us to incentivize ourselves to do the thing that everyone says not to do. So that we would just go ahead and seek cost modeling around birth to pre-K 4. And then in terms of like the timing, sort of stay in keeping with what we're currently seeing with ECAP, right? Where it's the school year.
For now, that's
Full
the model
day.
that we know, you
Right.
know.
So it leaves purchase, we're not trying to supplant purchase of care with ECAP full year, I guess.
Yeah, you could model cost of care ECAP for the full year, but this is what's happening.
All right. Just wanted to give a 15-minute warning. We will be wrapping up probably at 6 o'clock.
Sorry, there's a lot going on at Eastside tonight. There's like back to school and a governor's doing a town hall and yeah, it's so that's what that was about. So
I mean, just one note on the funding mechanisms.
Yeah.
The goal and what New Mexico and others are doing is merging everything into one agency, and there's talk about that at the IRMC and in other
Yeah.
places, but where it would be more like K-12, where like for my 7th grader, I don't know if he's qualifying for Title I or IDA. I'm not having to apply for all those things.
Right.
The system is helping do those things, and so that's really the goal eventually, is to not have families have to qualify and apply and do all this stuff. But-
or providers for that matter.
Correct.
Yeah.
This is what's happening now, and so does it make sense to kind of scale what's happening now instead of reinventing the system for this one pilot? So I think we
Right.
have talked to the administration, but
Okay. So just on that scope of services, I guess I'd like to open it up if anyone has any thoughts or reactions to us putting forward a scope for costing out, which just assumes birth through pre-K 4. The sort of that school year ECAP full day model.
When you
And-
say birth, are you referring to students with disabilities or just any student from, or I guess child, from birth?
Oh, we're talking about so far, because we haven't started getting into eligibility and access, which is the 4th bullet point, and probably where we'll have some of the most differentiation. We're talking about all kids right now, just in terms of like, what does the early childhood delivery, well, that's the delivery model, look like? It's like, who does it apply to? So let's just assume universal, and we're not differentiating by subgroup yet.
I think if you open it up from birth and it's not, and there's not like, and it pertains to kids that aren't necessarily individuals with disabilities, I think that's a really big net to cast.
It is.
So I'm not.
It is.
Not really.
And
I think starting at 3 or 4, when we're just talking about general early education, would be more appropriate to try and cost out. My other little comment, and I apologize, I missed your presentation, Madeline. It's just from like my world of working with early learners and having people move from one place or change childcare from one place. And there's a MOU in Newcastle County where, you know, the districts will defer to wherever. So like there was a point where I lived in Brandywine, but my son's childcare was in Red Clay. So they provided services for him because they were transporting him through there. And then there's families that'll move or bounce out, or kids that get, put out of one childcare and move to another. So some of the just our general redistricting may solve some of that, but I think it's just important to note that whatever we finally decide should eliminate that barriers of families that either change childcare centers, or if they move and then they're required to register in their new one. So sometimes they don't do that. There's a delay in service, like all of those things. So, excuse me, for me, I see that as a big opportunity to kind of make sure that we tighten that up when we roll over to a new model.
That is an exciting opportunity to think about. I agree. The 3 and 4-year-old caution, just to repeat it, other states and places that have done that have advised not to do that. And it's really because it destabilizes the market for everyone. So families don't just have a kid that's 3 or 4, they have kids from birth, right? And if you only fund 3 and 4-year-olds, what you tend to find is that programs don't offer birth to 3 anymore. And we have a strong decline in childcare offering to begin with. So if we disincentivize the more expensive kids by taking over and funding the 3 and 4-year-olds, it's really problematic for the community. So most states are not doing that anymore. They're going with a birth to 5 approach. It's expensive. There's no way around that. We can talk about the scaling and the targeting, and I think Tizzy has this down below, but most states are doing it by going by income, rather than going by age group. So,
Right.
I mean, it's a
Well, I
choice
think
to
the other-
be.
Go ahead, Tika.
I was just going to say, I think the other thing that will be important is like blending the funding and the different buckets to make sure we're capturing as many kids as possible.
Yes, and Madeline, you kind of spoke to the braiding that happens
Purchase of
behind the
care,
scenes.
yeah, and ECAP and Reading pre-K, but then also you're talking about IDEA funding that's already in district, so absolutely, that's a key component to this. Mhm.
And Madeline did reference, so there's a group that we just sort of, I don't know if we brought it back to life, just sort of restructured it, the Interagency Resource Management Council, which is now under the guidance of Lieutenant Governor Kylan Gay, to really look at a lot of the back end issues that present themselves when it comes to allowing us to have a more universal early childhood offering, and all of those pieces that currently kind of fall in the laps of consumers and providers. How can we make it a little bit more streamlined for the public? But I guess what we're saying is that that's not necessarily something we're gonna be making recommendations around through Reading Consortium. We're just gonna be talking about, I think, unless you guys object, like what are we recommending, or what do we wanna look at as potential options for us to take the next step for the impacted districts, kind of on behalf of Delaware, to move us toward a more universal early childhood system. And so I think, and I'll move down to the next one, but I hear, does anyone else have a concern around birth to pre-K 4 as opposed to narrowing to pre-K 3 and 4?
I don't, Tizzy, but I was just wondering, do we know of the schools that we would be targeting in the city? How many of them currently have a preschool attached to it? Because I see further down that we're looking at beyond just the school district
Yeah.
providing it, right? So we're looking at other providers, but I'm just curious to know how many already have that built into their programming?
I don't know offhand, actually.
Some are through like a Stubbs, which is built into the elementary school, but most of those programs are only IDEA with very few typical peers. So, I mean, and I'll let Jeff and others speak to this, but right now the districts have no way to have capital funding for grades below kindergarten. So that's another policy issue that needs to be addressed.
That was gonna be
you know.
that was my first thing I was gonna say as soon as I raised my hand.
Alright.
If that's not part of this, the districts are gonna continue to be hamstrung with respect to space and capital needs for this to occur. I mean, that's a very difficult reality to grapple with when space for the programming. So I would just put somewhere in this conversation. I know you have facilities, but like we're talking like, not just renovating a wing. You're talking like the need to build space. And then in Newcastle County, at least in Colonial, I'll challenge you to find the space since it took us 3 years to find the plot of land for Leach. Like, so like, I think that there's got to be some conversations around that. And from a birth to your question, Tizzy,
Yeah.
when I talk to the team and the folks at SEEP, they want access earlier. They want birth because of
Yeah.
what they're seeing and the needs that they can identify sooner. So
Mhm.
I think it's still a beast. It's a huge net. But if
Yeah.
you take your point of narrowing the scope to the districts that are part of the redistricting and, build it there so that it can be replicated to scale if you expand beyond, like,
Yeah.
because I do think that from a practitioner standpoint, I believe the birth to the all the way through is going to be the way to go, or you're not going to get the gains you think you're going to get, or the impact you're going to have in the long run for student success.
Yeah.
Well,
And
to Margie's question,
um,
there's three. So there's one at Warner, and there's two in Christina, Stubbs and Pulaski.
and what is it that's kind of attached, or what do you want to call it attached? The one at PS, that's a Head Start.
That's ECAP.
That's ECAP?
All right, me again. Good evening once.
Well, yeah, I guess PS does count as one of our schools. I was going to say it wasn't one of the ones because I was thinking of Harlan. But yeah, I guess ECAP would also be a PS.
Are we unmuted? Okay, we're unmuted now. Sorry, Tika, it talked over you. We couldn't hear what you said last.
Oh, you're fine. I said yes, there is an ECAP program at PS. I wasn't thinking about PS as a Reading school, but they are a Reading school. They're not a WLC school. I was thinking of Harlan, and I knew Harlan didn't have one.
Okay. Got it.
Most district programs are high majority IDEA funded. So unless they have ECAP spots, they might have a few slots for staff, paying, but with 1,803 kids paid for with ECAP, there's just very few to go around.
Yeah.
I mean, to the point that, and Jeff, I don't know if the numbers are this bad anymore, but you start the year with, your unit count in September of whatever it is, 1 to 14, and you get 25 or 30 kids by the end of the year. I mean, and they almost all have special needs. That's not right.
That's fair. I mean, we have, pre-K never stops, right? It's like and there's no slowing that roll. Like if you have a high schooler coming in March, you say, oh, wait a second, where are you coming from? What are you doing? Or, you know, pre-K is constant and, you try to staff for that accordingly, but you can only staff as far as your building can go. So for us at SEEP, we do like look to expand and we've in the past hired, you know, put a teacher and two paras on the bench because to your point, Madeline, short orders come, the rooms, we're going to fill the room fast enough. So, and at some point we end up having to close. We can't accept, you can't accept because you don't have any space for them. So the
And
expansion internally, but also space, like facilities. The other struggle is if you expand, I just know from my experience several years ago, trying to bring a building up to the level of inspection for it to be a pre-K site. I was a difficult even to get for an after-school program to be certified with some of the requirements that were in place. And I don't know if that's still in place, but like that's a lot of lift and a lot.
Yeah, and that's part of the
Yeah,
capacity building I was talking about, yeah.
yeah, that's a definite hurdle that is limiting if that doesn't get funded appropriately because it's to go to scale you would have to do a lot of retrofitting if you have existing space.
And I know we have facilities lower down, but I guess I sort of wonder if there's modeling, is there a clear way to model the, addressing those hurdles of being able to fund the capital?
Facilities.
Yeah.
I think in the model, I mentioned to Senator Lockman that we've worked with some national partners on modeling out, and they have built, different modeling tools around purchase of care and around ECAP. They've built in some infrastructure, like quality, scholarships, facilities. So they have some like very high level assumptions, but we would want to get into it more. I mean, yeah.
Senator
Yeah.
Locke, there's
Yeah,
a few comments in the chat.
Sure.
Jim Simmons says Brandywine School District has been dealing with capital funding for a couple years. To Jeff's point, he said there's an ECAP program at PS named after Joe Brum's school skill. And then he said Brandywine's also expansion pending the capital in the former Brandywine Country Club plot. And then Kelly also mentioned, could private programs be part of the mix with the districts as well?
Well, that's the
Yeah,
idea.
they have
with
to
mixed
be.
delivery. Yeah, they would have to be, I mean, which is kind of it on the next bullet in terms of delivery model. I don't think we even offered any alternatives to the idea of a mixed delivery system, which would be inclusive of all the potential providers.
And we should have charters on here.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yes, which would be
A policy change.
a policy change.
I'm not,
extend-
I'm not advocating for this, but another thing that I've seen districts do sometimes to combat the space barrier is instead of offering full day or students that would have been full day, they move them to half day so they can fit double the kids in.
Thoughts on that? We put the assumption as a full day. Madeline, do you have
I
a
mean,
thought?
what we've seen with half-day programs, especially in Head Start around the state, is the enrollment declines. I mean, parents work and 80% of parents of young kids are in the workforce. So, I wouldn't recommend a half day. I know some districts still offer it. It's not really what DOE prefers, but they allow them to offer it, so.
Yeah, and that's
It's
what I'm
not
saying.
the
I don't
ideal.
recommend it, but it
Yeah.
is a solution that I know has been utilized to get around that.
I would say for the sake of cost estimating,
Yeah.
just assume full day.
Just a simple day. I was gonna say, I'm like, do we like it? What about like the 9 month, assuming purchase of care continuing as is versus getting an estimate for what it would look like to have a year-round operation? That would probably be
So
scary.
That's ECAP currently is 9 months or 9 months. I would just match it up
Stick
with what
with
we
it.
do for
Mhm.
ECAP. I
Okay.
think that's an easy assumption to make.
Okay. So I'm not hearing any strong objection to us keeping the scope of services to go from birth with the current ECAP model, like the current ECAP model does. And the current school year and the ECAP model of 9 months and the full day, which is also currently standard. And so we do have reference here in the adjustments for populations. I think maybe we can hold off on that until we get to eligibility and access. That's more about the idea of like, do we want to make a recommendation around staging inclusion of certain populations as a priority en route to trying to achieve universality? Any concerns about mixed delivery? So obviously, with the assumption that this would be something that could happen as ECAP currently does in any eligible space, and extending the policy to allow charters to have to start to offer pre-K as well. I don't know how that impacts cost modeling, but just as a,
And just in
Talk
terms of
about it.
mixed delivery, should be included, but yeah.
so no, doesn't seem like there's any concerns, because I don't know how we would possibly do that otherwise, right? So.
I don't know the charter world like Margie does, but I would assume that there would have to be some significant changes to charter agreements with the state in order to do that. I don't know if they're certified or like if that's part of their model right now. That's, while it's good to open it up, I don't know what the lift would be on that. So I would
Me neither.
hear Margie what that would
Yeah.
look like.
Eastside used to have pre-K, and I don't know if, as the charter's been updated or something like that, that's changed, but they did used to have it.
No, actually, so the regulation would need to be changed for clarity. There's two, I guess, opinions on the current regulation.
I think it's code.
The charter world believes that the regulation does not exclude charter schools from having pre-K or, early childhood centers. That's why Eastside ventured into that realm. and then they were called out on it. They then decided to change, change paths and repurpose that building that they were using. We then also started an early childhood center in our building, birth through all the way through 4 years old, pre-K. We ran it for 7 years. Had multiple secretaries of education come into our building, and I showed them the center. There were no problems until the summer of 2020, when we then were informed that we needed to stop operating the program because charter schools were not allowed to, or find an independent operator to do it. So we chose to find an independent operator so that we could keep the program. But yeah, it was when I was faced with that in the summer of 2020, Jeff, I had to decide, am I going to prepare our school for the COVID and the pandemic, or am I going to fight this battle? If it had happened at any other point, I would have fight the battle. I would have called our attorney and we would have taken it to court. But because of the timing, we decided to just take the easier path.
It's definitely a legal interpretation that
Okay.
the
Yeah.
charters are defined as K-12. That doesn't mean they can't be.
And we don't have, we need the extra capacity, right? So it's not an issue that, that we have more than enough opportunities for early childcare. We need more players in the game. So it would help us if we just sort of broaden the definition, so.
I think Jeff's point about charters agreements would have to be changed is good, and I think choice preferences would have to be considered, because now are you getting a
Well,
preference?
that's the other part. Yeah, I mean, in states where
So there's
it's
some other
allowed, Jeff, it's usually, that's the thing is that it's, like for us, 40% of our kindergarten seats are filled by siblings of our current students, right? So if we had those younger siblings in our pre-K program, then we would be able to prepare them that much sooner to transition into our dual language program. So yeah, the idea would be also, like you're talking about, is with our authorizer, there would need to be consideration on how the enrollment of those kids in the early childhood program, how that then determines their enrollment in the K-12. Are they automatically in, or do they have to do a lottery, et cetera?
I think that's what I think that's where I was thinking a little bit, Margie, like,
Yeah.
is that there's got to be something in that space that has
Sure.
impact. I didn't have any knowledge of what you just described that happened to you previously, nor did I know anything about Eastside. I never, back in those days, I was still a secondary guy. I was only worried about school. So thank you for the history lesson.
No problem.
I guess sort of a clarifying question on cost modeling. I guess it's gonna look less at certainly existing seats as they exist and more on potential students. So it's gonna look more at population. Like, how would you even?
I would think you would
Yes.
look at like you would want to set the population, you'd want to be eligible.
In
And
the
then
geographic
from there,
area.
yeah, and then from there you would model out how many of them actually enroll in the seat.
Yeah, okay.
That's how we've done it.
Okay.
Assume about 80% of people enroll in a voluntary program. You look at how many enroll now, but that's how we've done it.
So the cost is gonna be more based on the geographic scope that we fixate on and less on existing capacity in the schools, which we obviously have to be then considering.
Yes, and we're gonna have to do some thinking about where is there duplication. So, for example, when you all funded pre-K at St. Michael's, Leap of Faith, those kids were funded by some source previously, probably
Right.
Pitch of Care.
So maybe,
So
so
it's more the increment than the full price. So there's some assumptions we can,
you need to know how many seats exist and then how much
And
be expanding it to meet
how
now the
many
new
qualify
like.
now for purchase of care, but we have some of that built into the model.
Would
Period.
this assume that we're only adding ECAP and we're not expanding purchase of care? Or that would,
Oh,
because purchase of care becomes very complicated to model out.
yeah,
I was.
ECAP, I think, is a little bit more structured because it's just per student has a cost.
I mean, I think we were just thinking ECAP, but I guess there would be some implications potentially
Yeah.
for purchase of care. But we were really just focusing in on the 9-month school year ECAP seat.
I think so. But some of them are increments, some of them are full.
Mhm.
That's what we'd have to figure out, yeah.
Okay. All right. I think that gives us kind of a good segue to, Matt, did you go off me? Oh, no, I think he was just getting ready to step away. I know he's in California and he's multitasking, so I think he'll be back at some point. Okay, we're already on our third bullet, so that's the geographic cost. So the ideal assumption for cost modeling, and we can decide what else we wanna look at for comparison if we'd like, but would be that throughout whatever is the quote unquote receiving district, and by that, we would mean whoever is receiving the footprint of Wilmington, that would be redistributed of Christina. So that could be in the one model, red clay brandywine split, it could be that entire metropolitan footprint we've described, or it could be the entirety of northern Newcastle County, if that is ultimately the direction that would go. So I guess that already gives us kind of three comparisons to consider, or three different routes to consider in terms of what the size of that population and associated cost would be to provide whatever the next step towards universal would be, or steps throughout that district. And that is, would be obviously different than looking at piloting it in Wilmington only, which we did not think we necessarily wanted to cost out, but I would welcome any thoughts on whether or not anyone thinks that we should be looking at limiting it to Wilmington. I think part of the initial idea and draw of piloting universal was that it would be universal for the entire district receiving more Wilmington students.
Well, and if you're gonna phase it out by income, that
Right.
catches people who are
Sure.
mobile, like what Tika's talking about, poverty isn't static, people aren't static, and where you live isn't necessarily where you send your kid to childcare, so there's some of that too.
Yeah. So I think the assumption there is that limiting it to Wilmington is not the logical way to meet the need and test the system.
Tizzy,
Any,
I mean, I don't know, could be potentially an outlier in the world of
sure.
Chiefs, but I would recommend, if you're gonna cost out one of these models, I would do the Northern Newcastle County model, like all four, like, because if this is gonna work, the resources, that's the only model that's gonna put all the resources on the table that are needed to carry this off.
sure, yeah,
So all the other stuff is tinkering around the edges anyway, that if it doesn't work, you're gonna have to do it, that's gonna be the other option. So I mean, I would think you would want to cost out the go big or go home one, four districts, it's now one unified Northern Newcastle County district.
okay,
They'll give you a better scope of the challenge that lays ahead than trying to carve out certain districts in certain areas.
okay,
I just think that would be a better use of better use of time.
okay.
But that's just Jeff Menzer, superintendent opinion, not speaking.
And member of this committee.
Member of
who
this
has-
committee, but not speaking on behalf of the Newcastle Chiefs or
Gotcha.
even anybody. I'm just saying, like, as a Jeff Menzer, I'm like, just go big or go home, because that's the only way to get the actual accurate, I think, feeling. But that's just that's my
Okay. So definitely, I think we absolutely want to have that Northern Newcastle County. Do we want, I guess, would the red clay brandywine split and metropolitan essentially be the same, because it's the same? It's geographically the
Geographic.
same area, just one is split in one case it's split in two, and the other it's unified.
Yep.
So I guess that's two.
Yeah. Yeah, because you could get the same if you did the metropolitan one. You're going to get the same population.
Yeah, exactly.
You could. I mean, it's all going to be high dollar anyway, so it's really
Yeah.
not.
We're ready for the sticker shock.
Yeah, but I think, I just think that the timing could be right for the other one, so why dilute the argument? But that's just
Kind of like why price out pre-K 3 and 4 and incentivize doing the more affordable thing.
yeah. Like let's just go. The one that's gonna get
Okay.
more traction is gonna be, is the four districts as one model.
Interesting.
From a feasibility standpoint.
tax-based.
if we're really gonna do this, like not just pretend to do it, like really do it, that's the one in all the conversations that crazily makes probably the most sense.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy, but I agree with you. Um, so I think, oh, all right, so just do that. I mean, Nick, would you recommend, and does it feel like it would be a lot of work to have the two?
I have no, again, we're
Versus-
making, we're picking work for other people, like, so.
I know, that's what I'm
But-
saying. Well, Nick's
But,
here.
but,
Yeah, I
but,
would
but
say-
also, I just want to caution you too, these other people, we are now, in case you're not aware, the districts for Newcastle County, a suit has been filed in Chancery Court
Yes,
for so they are now, you can rest assured that the very people you're going to be asking to do all this cost modeling are going to be heavily involved in this proceeding that's going to be potentially time consuming.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
we're putting more work on somebody's plate and we haven't added an hour to the day. I didn't hear 25 hours in the day being something we created.
We tried, it
We
did not,
have
it
some
did
modeling tools and cost studies already done and some
Okay.
national partners who can help. So, I mean, it doesn't add hours to the day, but I think it gets us a head start.
I think
Yeah.
the most difficult thing is just making sure you get a population that aligns with the district.
Okay.
Once you're able to narrow that down, I
Okay.
think it's just a cost.
Yeah,
of
I
a
mean,
child.
Okay,
agreed.
cost per child, okay.
And then the assumptions around the edges. Yeah.
Sure. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have our geographic focus, just let's look at the big enchilada and let's see if it's possible, I think, to do that secondary. I'll just say the metropolitan. Upper northern Newcastle County scope, if we can pull that off. So I'm still gonna leave facilities aside. And so that gets us to what is probably the hardest part, I feel like, to talk about, which is how do we want to address eligibility and access? So like that's probably the biggest area where we might see some cost differentiation in terms of who within the population are we actually talking about having giving sort of priority access perhaps on the route to universal. I don't think, I mean, are we costing out universal just as, so we know? I'm just putting that out there, and then maybe looking at what are some stages between now and universal. Is that a feasible thing to do, Nick? Like if we're saying like, okay, let's see how much it would cost to do all the kids or all the kids.
It ends
likely
up
to
being
enroll.
80% of a smaller percentage, because you don't take the first 3 months, because you assume paid family medical leave, and
Okay.
you don't take half the 5-year-olds because they're in kindergarten, so it's
Okay.
like a percentage of a percentage. So universal doesn't mean every kid is, no one's mandated, just to be clear, we should have the word voluntary somewhere here.
Voluntary, sure.
So it ends up being a percentage of a percentage. That's how we've done our models, is like. So-
Yeah, I mean, then you would make an assumption of like, if you were to start doing income eligibilities, you would
Well,
say,
that's now
you
where
know,
we-
like
yeah.
if 50% of families are at 400% of the federal poverty level,
Yeah.
then you apply 50% of the kids are gonna be eligible, and then again, you keep just playing around with your eligibility number and then
Yeah.
multiplying that by however much it costs to.
So I think, yes, I think we'd want the cost modeling of what full universal would look like, and I guess now we need to figure out what are the stages between what we have now and that we wanna cost out to inform the ultimate recommendation that we make.
Yeah.
So I think so what we have here, we have the income-based, and then priority population.
Right.
To think through.
And I think, and I should have caught this, but homeless
Oh.
and foster, I think, are automatically eligible for ECAT now.
Gotcha.
They're
Okay.
not covered. They're only eligible if they can find a slot, because it's a limited number of slots right now.
Sure.
But I think they are automatically eligible. We can double check that.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't.
So we assume
And then the disabilities, if you're in that DEA, you're covered, in the programs that the districts offer. And then in the cost care study, we built in a little bit of extra for like community providers for the wraparound.
Oh, okay,
So those may already be.
already in there, so that's like the
Double check.
baseline we're already living with. So theoretically, any child who would fall under one of those is supposed to be receiving services
I
now.
mean, we have to cost it out more of them, but that's the policy if we want to keep the current policy going forward.
Okay. So, and right now we've got the 200% and we saw what other states are doing. So, I guess, do we want to talk about, what a phased in timeline, like what would be a good step forward from where we are now at 200%. I'm looking at you in case you have any suggestions of what a good next step would be, and I guess we just don't know yet how many people we're catching.
When we've done it for purchase of care, we've done it for like 250, 300, 350, 400.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a little bit arbitrary because it's really expensive, as we
Yeah.
all said, no matter what we pick.
No matter what we
So, I think if you guys pick a few kind of markers, that might be helpful, to look at.
Okay,
Madeline, doesn't this present like just a really good pilot population to test it, right? So
Yeah.
should we test our ideal situation?
definitely.
Okay.
I think we'll
I'd
have a
wrestle with
cost
that
for
a little
that,
bit.
no.
There's research and almost every other state has done much more than us, so I don't know that there's much we need to test
Right.
personally. I think if
Yeah.
it makes the case politically,
Yeah.
we can pilot. it.
Oh, you
Um,
gotta test it because you gotta convince people that it's worth the investment,
Off the political
right?
argument.
You don't have
I
to
don't think it's
test, we
actually
don't
a
have to
test.
test it. We don't need to be
know what
convinced.
works.
But there's a
Right,
whole
yeah.
population out there that does.
It's not to know whether it works. I think that's my.
Yes.
point.
It's a political test, not a, I don't even know what the other term would be.
Research
Yeah,
based.
it's not
Mhm.
research on efficacy from an educational standpoint and all the other things. It's purely a political test. But yes, I think we cost out like a full universal, but then I think we need to think about when we're going to be hugely shocked by that number. Is there a recommendation we need to make on like, okay, well, let's start at 300, let's start at 400, of the poverty level. Or that nobody pays more than 7% sounds nice.
That's the federal,
That's the federal. Any thoughts on that, or Nick, even from like a modeling, from a actual analyst perspective, what makes sense or what's feasible to cost out?
I mean, I think you could do 50% intervals. like, just
50%
so you
intervals?
have, I think that's fairly easy, right? So Madeline, in the past, right,
Mhm.
Rodell has put forward, we're at 200, so 250, 300.
Right.
350 is 400, like the top level that we want to get to, like,
Why would that one be? I mean, how many people does that cover?
I'd have to look. but-
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why 400 is sort of the upper limit, but I guess, I don't.
No,
remember
it wouldn't be.
fine.
It would be the phases to get to universal. Yeah,
Okay, to get to universal, which would be like when it's, no one pays more than 7% of
Right,
their income?
right.
Got it, okay. Okay,
No, this is just examples. Yeah.
gotcha. Okay.
250, 300, 350, 400 and up.
And on up,
Yeah,
okay.
we can
gotcha.
look at what would it need to be and how much of the population does that cover?
All right, so we would want to just keep going until we ran out of.
yeah, I mean, I would imagine it gets diminishing as you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
The state median income is like, is it 85? And we're at 50% of that now. We're only 200% of federal poverty level at 64,000. So then you're at, 100 and something. So yeah,
Let's
it's,
just go
the
up to
bulk
the
of it is at the beginning.
two infinity, sort of, till we run out of additional room to go up, okay. So. Do we want to talk about other priority populations beyond what is currently covered, or we really just want to keep it to that income base? For modeling purposes, I guess that sounds from an analytical perspective, maybe harder, to like add in additional populations if we're talking about.
It would
dual
be like
language
a
learners.
weight. You could add a weight, for a population. A lot of the wraparound services are already built in. What were you?
I was gonna say the dual, like, I would
Yeah.
need to think about how to figure out how many dual
Dual language learners are.
And I
okay.
think that would be hard.
Yeah.
I don't know the data source off the top of my head that I could easily find that. I guess I could go to DOE and ask them for it, but
I think we've used like Migration Policy Institute and that data is,
okay, it's a guess. at
we
this
can look.
point, So
Yeah.
So how does weighting work for priority groups? Like, what does that look like in other places? What tend to be priority groups and how do they weight them?
So for example, a special needs in purchase of care, we've been looking at adding like a weight comparable to what the K-12 units are in early care and education. So basically an incentive, additional, because it's going to take more to serve those.
Okay.
so would it be
Gotcha.
taking like whatever you think the cost per student is and saying like you multiply that by like 1.5
Exactly.
if they're an eligible population?
Is that's commonly used? Or where?
In other states, yeah, we can pull who does what, but yes, other states do that. In their pre-K programs now, which we don't do. We
Okay.
don't do any incentives for dual language. We don't
No.
do any, yeah. We're working on that in purchase of care and, the special needs funding comes from IDEA, you know. Like we
So-
talked about, it's really limited because some of the units, you know, don't get renewed when more kids come in, but, so it's not perfect, but.
Okay, so there,
There's
is,
a few
is
ways
there
it
a
works.
weight for students with disabilities, or is it just that there is money?
We would have to look at that, right, Jeff, whether. Cause right now your pre-K unit, your pre-K funding from the state that's not IDEA is units, right?
Yes, this is a Emily and the crew, and they, it's units, and then we supplement with, I believe, purchase of care and ECAP.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm offhand and I would, if anyone else is sort of unsure what we would put in. You know, perhaps beyond dual language, that seems like one area that we can identify where we could maybe model. Additional resources for those students. But
Can
I'm
I
not
ask
sure
a
what.
Should we
Yeah.
use, oh, I'm sorry.
Go,
Um,
go.
I
Go
think
ahead,
it's,
Margie, mine's not related.
no, I just had a meeting yesterday where we were looking at data about our MLLs and stuff, but, I think Julia had some of the data, Madeline from Rodell. I think isn't it 10%? The MLL population. So if you need a number, so look at the number of students that
Oh.
would qualify for early childhood, take 10% of it. I don't know.
Oh, I see. That makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yep, I think that is what we've used. Mhm.
Okay.
We can look at what other states do in terms of a weight or an additional.
So we can look at a weight for dual language learners. Other groups that we think are not currently represented in the base, or Jeff, did you have something else you wanted to bring?
I was kind of jumping down to the last bullet on the alternative considerations, and
Yeah.
let's talk about this wraparound supports, but then the word transportation in there just kind of jumped out. Like,
It has a way of doing that.
where in this is that factored in? Because you're talking about a lot of buses potentially, if we're having to offer it for, if everyone gets the same access to everything, like transportation, we can barely make our runs now
Yeah.
with our regular district. On top of the students who have needs, those buses are at a premium. So I was just curious, when I didn't even think about it until I got to that slide. I'm like, someone needs to factor that equation in here, because that's another variable that I, I don't have the answer. I don't know what the other whether other states do with universal pre-K and transportation,
Yeah.
how they
We
do it.
need to look, yeah.
But like
Mhm.
that is a uh major thing to look at on top of the capital side.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, capital costs and transportation seem like very hidden potential boogeyman.
And if it's in a
Yeah.
mixed delivery system, it's even more complex. So I think we have not modeled transportation. We've kind of set it aside to date.
Yeah, and so, and
yeah.
again, and I'm not gonna, just to, if you do that for, you have the homeless and the foster care, know that a lot of those are specialized van services that are even, like, so it's like, it's not all just transport, it's not all just school buses.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
specialized van services that when you're tagged homeless, you get displaced, right? You know, stay put. You started in Wilmington, but now your family's in Milford, and you're going to choose to stay in Wilmington. So there's a van that goes pick you up in the morning and brings you, you know, from Milford to Wilmington. Like, that's a, I don't know what that looks like in this space, like with homelessness, foster care, for students in pre-K world. I would just say
Yeah.
that it's not just school buses.
Okay.
I would say maybe to Madeline's point, that maybe something you may want to set aside, just because from a modeling perspective, that's very complicated, but also from a feasibility perspective. Bus drivers are costly.
Yeah.
Buses are costly. For the last several years, there's been trouble hiring bus drivers, hiring bus
Yeah.
contractors.
Yeah,
And
I'm
then
not
also
saying,
just
maybe not saying that you model it,
themselves.
but that
But
somehow in the consideration,
Mhm.
transportation, like you might have to somehow figure out a way to defer that to that, like to, the way it is now at school, everybody gets an opportunity to ride a bus in pre-K and Colonial. Like everybody gets that choice.
Yeah,
Those that don't, those that do. But if you're gonna do that, like that's even complicated to model. But how are you gonna get away from suddenly offering it, not offering it at all? Or how are you gonna, somehow that has to be considered in
yeah,
the policy if we're not, if you're not, if it is a costly model, and you are right, it is a huge one and it's a problematic one, someone's got to figure out a way to legally make this happen because that's gonna come up.
yeah. As an equity issue, obviously, yeah, and we're supposed to be being attentive to that, so, okay, that's helpful. Before we move on from weighted or reserved seats for priority groups, I feel like we only, really emphasize dual language learners, and I wanna make sure we're not leaving behind any other subgroups, obviously, we're addressing, income. So, before we move on from it, I just wanna make sure we're not leaving any significant gap there. It seems, I'm not,
And Suzie, I think you might have skipped the first
Oh,
bullet too,
which,
under alternative.
immediate
consideration.
universal, well, so I think that we've agreed on birth to pre-K 4, so I think we'll have that sort of reflected in like the, I don't know, the baseline universal,
Yeah, okay.
I believe. That'd be my understanding, yeah. So I did kind of skip it. So, all right,
Margie put in the chat, what about accelerated learners?
oh,
Yeah, we gotta remember both ends of the spectrum, right?
mm-hmm,
How early does that get diagnosed or identified, or
Yeah.
whatever the right word is?
It actually, well, we screen for it for early entry into kindergarten, but it doesn't
Oh,
mean
right.
that it can't be screened earlier.
Yeah, I would have to look. I don't know.
okay.
Yeah.
See if there's any existing policy around that, I don't know, that seems like it'd be difficult to model anything for a weight. I mean, do we have like a
I mean, I guess you
percentage
could
of
look at the
accelerated?
overall population
Okay.
that is classified as accelerated
Okay.
and maybe apply that to the, birth to 5 population.
Okay,
I don't know how we would change the call,
weighting.
like, does that mean that they would get more supports because they are maybe working at a higher level, or do they need less supports because they're
That's
stronger?
that's
Like
very
at the,
controversial.
yeah. And I don't know how we would want
It's
to.
controversial on 2 points.
Yeah.
Should they get more or less? And in the early childhood world, the bands of developmental, development basically are broad, and people are hesitant to identify someone, developmentally because they cross age groups. And so, it's controversial.
I don't know if we cost model that, but I think it kind of goes in like the transportation line of like something to look and see what others are doing. My
Mhm.
concern, I guess, would be, I'm very interested in it, because I think that obviously that's something that we need to accommodate, but there'd be that fear from an equity perspective that acceleration could be an indicator of, access to resources, and then if you give more resources to reward that, that seems to be doubling down on inequity, so I would just love to see how other people are tackling it, just as like a
And
policy.
yes, and
question.
unless it's still within the income, but you're giving slightly more something, so there's still.
Right,
but
right.
we can.
See if
find
anyone
out
has
what other
figured it
states
out.
are doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, if anyone thinks of additional subgroups that we need to be considering, either call them out or send them on after we conclude the meeting. And Madeline, I would look to you so there's already wraparound support, apart from transportation, there's already some provision of wraparound supports baked in.
I believe screenings and home visiting, and meals are all built into the cost of care study. We can confirm that, but
Okay.
because quality means doing
Okay.
serving the family, and that we modeled it after Head Start standards, to some extent, those are in there. We could lay out exactly what they are and see if you all think they're sufficient, but,
Okay.
they are in there to some extent.
Okay, that's helpful. So I think we can presume that the wraparound supports needed to support, what we define as quality or would already be reflected in the ECAP cost. That, which is good. So that's the list that I came up with. Thank you, Madeline, for your support in trying to do that. Do we feel like there's anything missing? I think particularly from like a cost differentiation perspective.
Well, the
Um,
capacity building of
Oh,
not just getting capital up to speed, but getting programs up to speed. So programs can't even hire people now when they don't have
yeah.
to have qualifications.
Good
and they
point,
make it-
Madeline. Staff.
the capacity building of staff.
Yeah,
That's the main thing when you're looking
Yeah,
at cost. I mean, renovations and materials and staff, and we have
Okay.
scholarships through ECIC now. But this would be at a scale that's significant.
Okay, so scaling up ECIC, capacity building supports would be a priority, and then you're right, I almost skipped returning back to the capital cost question. So I don't know if we want to have some conversation around that or how to address costing that out.
costing out what, capital or staff?
Capital, like what would it look like to be able to actually expand seats to the, like, how do you attach a
mean,
cost?
I mean, there's a couple of different ways to do it. I mean, if you get a base number, right, and you could, um, I guess you could do it two ways. You could either build a facility and get a cost model from how much would it cost to build now a facility. I'm talking Jeff K-12 like world, right? Like there's a formula
Mhm.
that you could adopt to build. What would it cost to build an elementary school X size? Like what would it cost based on the number of kids, their square footage, and you have like a formula you would use. You could figure out how much a building would cost. And then likewise, you could probably Madeline might be able to get like how much does it cost to retrofit some of these places? Like what's the licensure need in a building on average, right? Not everyone's going to be the same. Like bathrooms, doors, sinks, all the little things that have to be done in order, like you could cost that out. And then, I mean, then you could just play around with the numbers, like look at,
Yeah, we can make some assumptions. I think
yeah, you
that's
could make
right.
some assumptions there, like, how, first of all, how many kids are you talking about? That's going to
Right.
dictate the capital need.
Mhm.
And it's going to be hard that's going to be a tough one, the capital one. I mean, you almost have to have a separate little group that's not necessarily, it's facilities based because, I don't know, the privates, the daycares, or not the
Right.
daycares, but the privates and the other ones that are out there, how much capacity do they have? What's their room to grow? Um,
And then converting their existing, so not just the physical, but
yes,
what Miss Mary's Childcare provides licensed childcare, but now we want them to provide something at a higher level. They need to have
yes,
special services, they need to have
that's
home visiting, they need to have, to get Miss Mary's Childcare to that level. That's what I mean by capacity building.
but I think
She
that,
now needs different qualifications, she needs to share staff with other centers, like there's other investments that need to be made in the
yeah,
system.
agreed. And that was,
So
I think, what I
I think
was,
we built in like a quality or capacity, like a weight basically
per
for that,
child
a
weight.
percentage, and we can talk about what went into that, but.
Yeah, and the question too is whether the recommendation includes the state paying that for private providers or community
Yeah.
providers, whereas, to Superintendent Menzer's point, we could use the school construction formula for some sort of facility assumption, for school districts,
Just
maybe
the school
charter schools as well.
Right, for.
But that wouldn't get to everyone.
It
You know,
wouldn't get to
it wouldn't cover.
community.
I
community
wouldn't
providers.
advise that politically.
Yeah, no, but I mean,
Yeah.
that would have to be.
that's, yeah, again, that's going to be huge. I know there's going to be all kinds of implications of that, but in terms of the idea of what the facility costs to get the space, because we would need the space or the providers are going to need the space.
Some is build, some is retrofit, some is use
Some is-
existing, so I think
some
that's,
is
we gotta
existing,
figure out the
yeah.
combination.
Yeah,
Are
The
others
cost
do-
for building an elementary school versus a child, you gotta have small sinks and toilets, like there's other things that.
yeah.
Are other states providing, from a capital perspective, supports for community-based?
Yeah, we
Providers?
used to. We had a big fund
we
at Children
used
and
to?
Families First before COVID, which makes no sense. During COVID, we got rid of one-time money to build playgrounds, do roofs, do iPads, do blocks, there's nothing like that.
So
So
it's
Miss Mary's
state money?
Childcare has no option right now. If she wants to go from license to quality,
So wait, those were state funds that went through Children and Families First?
Mhm.
What was the name of that?
capacity building fund.
Oh, capacity building fund,
Mhm.
infrastructure fund.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Programmatic investments. to get
Programmatic
people-
infrastructure fund, not
And
But-
it was physical also.
It was physical also, so it was a fund that could be applied to capital or programmatic. That's interesting. And there are examples of that in other states
Oh,
still?
yeah, tons.
Okay.
Some are public-private, some are revolving endowment things. I talked to CJ Bell about doing like a revolving loan where it gets forgiven if you serve a certain number of purchase care kids. I mean, there's lots of ways you could structure that, but
This community or quality investment system through Caitlin Gleason's
Yeah.
team, does that also support capacity in that way, or is that? more-
right now it's like $50,000 per site and they are requiring it to be used on staff, which is the majority of costs and the most important thing for quality, but there's no option to use it for.
Materials or
Material
building.
or something, or-
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't realize that we used to have one and we got.
Isn't it a shame? And I get calls all the time. Hey, my neighbor wants to start a childcare. Like, how can she get her toilets and sinks? Like, I don't.
She used to be able to go to Children and Families First and have
Yeah.
access to a fund?
Yeah.
That's crazy. I had no idea. And what was the reason we stopped?
Leadership changes plus capacity in organizations is my answer.
Okay, interesting. Wow. Okay. I mean, it feels to me, based on what we've laid out, that like the major difference in costs we're gonna see is by looking at going from 200% to whatever 100%, is where we're really gonna see the differentiation. And, you know, maybe like that dual language learner, sorry. Bump. And maybe we can come up with some kind of an estimate in that capacity capital side of things. Correspondingly to the number of seats we're looking to grow. That feels like a lot, but also it's still only 6:40, so any questions? I mean, there's no reason we can't stop there, because we obviously are gonna have to write this into a resolution that everyone's gonna get a chance to review, but, anything that we feel like we are missing? No? We got it? Well, and we nailed it, sort of.
There's a
Oh.
comment in the chat from Jim Simmons.
Yeah.
Would it make sense to find the amount, then calculate the percent?
In which amount? I'm trying to make you come off mute. That's my goal.
All
Now,
right,
there we
I'm
go.
off mute. There you go. You got me. You know, we keep saying it's 200% of the poverty issue, and then we figure out what that number is. If we
Mhm.
know how much it's going to cost, figure out what that number is, and then that tells us the percentage. I just feel like we're guessing at a percentage, whether it's 200, 400, 500, and then hoping that it's enough to subsidize those families that need it, versus finding out what the number of the cost would be and then figure out the percentage. I don't know. That's the
No,
way
that's
my
a good
brain
question.
works.
For clarity, and I think we are hoping to do that. We'll see if we can write the resolution with that, is that like the jumping off point is to like figure out what that whole universe would be in northern Newcastle County of all of the seats that would be needed. Based on the modeling, 80% uptake and yada, yada. So like the full number would be available. And then I think in terms of looking for how would we like scaffold our way there, then looking at how many people are hit by 200%,
What's the
250, 300, and we'll go at 50% intervals all the way up to, I guess, whatever brings us back to that first number. So we'll be able to see everything from 200 to universal.
Okay. Yeah, at least the
think.
way I heard it was we're trying to figure out what percentage we're going to go to above 200 versus let's figure out what the cost is. And then we know what the percentage is. I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
that's just the way
No, we're gonna see the cost at every
percentage
50%
point.
interval after
Okay.
200, so that we can decide what is politically feasible to recommend as a
Yeah,
first step.
because so first I want to give kudos to Jeff. I think Jeff's doing a great job of representing the school side of this, and Margie as well, because we oftentimes don't think about the charters because we group them together, but there's some very different things that happen on each side, right? So, and I try to just listen and take in and learn notes from people so I can sound smart when I talk later.
Same.
But
Same.
I also think that, or maybe it's my concern that whatever we decide, this group decides, is going to be a huge monetary fiscal note. So the more fiscal notes that we keep adding to the initial fiscal note,
Yeah.
I just don't want that to be what breaks the decision, I guess.
Well, no, you're right on track there. So what we're trying to do, I mean, I think for this specific group, we're just trying to decide what cost estimates to get. Ultimately, it's gonna be up to the Reading Consortium to look at what all of our resolutions generate in terms of cost estimates and say, you know, they could look at this and be like, absolutely not, that's not gonna be attached to redistricting. So that's why that's exactly why we're getting these, so we can decide whether or not we want to
Okay.
attach it to the overall proposal.
Yeah, I just, like I said, when I think about the number one plan is the redistricting and what does that
Yeah.
look like, which is going to come with a huge fiscal note.
Mm-hmm.
The more fiscal notes we put to it,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just worried
Yeah.
that it then gets kicked back because of that versus whether it's a good decision to do it and move it.
Yeah. Although, I mean, I think at the same time, it's like, we don't wanna, you know, make a massive investment in redistricting, but not invest in the things that are gonna make that actually successful at the end of the
No,
day. And
I understand why you're doing it.
Yeah.
I'm just concerned because the why for us is completely different than the why for other people.
Yeah.
And so the what is oftentimes defined by the why. And if you don't
Yeah.
have we got different groups who have different whys. And so if they don't know the why for our what, it could get shot down because they have a different why.
Yeah. No, you're right. This one is one of my favorite, of our whys, just in the sense that it came, honestly, from a superintendent first, who, when we talked about what do you think would be the most critical thing in the success of reform, was early childhood, getting kids what they need as early as possible is what's gonna make the long-term viability of our public school system happen or not.
I fundamentally agree, and I don't know any educator who would disagree. And if they do, we should take their license.
Exactly. So let's put a cost to it and let's see what's actually possible and what we can convince other legislators and the governor of doing, because, you know, we've been talking about it, I think, well, not everyone's talking about it in theoreticals. I know a lot of people are talking about it in very specific, clear, data, but for a lot of us, we've just been talking about it in a very lofty way. And so we're trying to make this real. But yeah, I think it's gonna be a big decision point for the consortium to decide whether or not we're afraid of bogging down redistricting with the cost of piloting early childhood expansion. I know what I think, but I'm only one vote. Cool. Well, I think Matt will be disappointed. I don't know if he'll be disappointed or overjoyed if we all log off before he gets a chance to come back and join us, but,
I was gonna say,
yeah.
we do have to offer public comment.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Jim was.
Was
our
he
only
it?
Public member.
And he
Yeah.
doesn't really count as a public member. So, okay, so we did it all, public comment, and, I think our work is done. I mean, we're gonna revisit this, so we're gonna have to now try to turn all these scribbles into a resolution and so then we'll talk about that, not next week, because I don't know if anyone didn't see the email, but because of Rosh Hashanah, we are not meeting next week. And so we're pushing out our overall schedule accordingly. So you should have gotten an email about that. And I forget what our next topic is gonna be in 2 weeks. Do you remember it, Elena? What's our topic in 2 weeks?
I can pull it up.
While Elena's doing that, Senator Lockman, I just want to share that pushing out the meetings to October 7th and 14th kind of makes it tough for me. I have a Citizens Finance Oversight Committee on the 7th, and then I have my board meeting on the 14th.
Oh,
Just
huge.
want to let
Okay.
you know, I might be able to eke out of the Citizens Finance Oversight Committee, although our funding is getting a lot of attention lately, so I kind of like don't. Uh,
Yeah.
So I want to stay abreast of what's going on there, and then obviously the board meeting. Also, that 14th, just for your record information, that's the state's Teacher of the Year banquet too, as well.
Oh, well
Not that
then-
anybody necessarily in this room. I don't know if Margie's got somebody there. I know I'm having to send a representative because we have a board meeting as well. So
Oh,
it's
right.
just something else to
Okay.
factor in that I know popped up on my calendar when I accepted the invite from Elena earlier.
Okay, well, that's helpful. We may have to pivot a little bit there. But we have two more topics. I know we have the topic. I don't know if that was already set to be next week or and that we're pushing out, which is the one about sort of like overall talking about choice and charter and student assignment policy, that particular piece of the recommendations. And then what was the other one? We've talked about so many things.
Well, we talked about, the specialized programs at the school within the school. I don't know if that's.
That was last week and we're bringing it
Yeah.
back. All right, well, we will update you on the topics for the, I guess, last two or three meetings. And make sure everyone gets the resolution, but, this is good. I always feel productive after these meetings. I feel like they're short, but we talk about all kinds of good stuff. And it's gonna be really interesting to see what ends up coming back, so. Thank you, guys. You can have back your 45 minutes.
Good
Thank you.
night.